At 11 a.m. on the 27th of May, Prime Minister Winston Churchill had to provide an update on the Battle of Crete and the hunt for the Bismarck to the House of Commons, which was meeting in Church House, following the Commons chamber in the Palace of Westminster being destroyed by incendiary bombs dropped by the Luftwaffe earlier in the month. Standing before the assembled group of members of Parliament, Churchill delivered his address, covering first the struggle for Crete before recounting the events of Hood's loss and the air attacks against Bismarck, before turning to the events of that morning.
This morning at daybreak, or shortly after daybreak, the Bismarck was attacked by the pursuing British battleships. I do not know what were the results of the bombardment. It appears, however, that the Bismarck was not sunk by gunfire, and she will now be dispatched by torpedo. It is thought that this is now proceeding, and it is also thought that there cannot be any lengthy delay in disposing of this vessel. Great as is our loss in the Hood, the Bismarck must be regarded as the most powerful, as she is the newest battleship in the world, and this striking of her from the German Navy is a very definite simplification of the task of maintaining the effective mastery of the northern seas and the maintenance of the northern blockade. I dare say that in a few days it will be possible to give a much more detailed account, but the essentials are before the House, and although there is shade as well as light in this picture, I feel that we have every reason to be satisfied with the outcome of this fierce and memorable naval encounter.
Having delivered his address, Churchill sat down. But hardly had he sat down, then he was handed a slip of paper, brought in by Brendan Bracken, and passed to him by one of his secretariat, John Peck. Churchill read the note and promptly rose again. I do not know whether I might venture, with great respect, to intervene for one moment, he said. I have just received news that the Bismarck is sunk. At this news, Churchill later wrote, they, the assembled members of the House of Commons, seemed content. At Bletchley Park, when the news that the Bismarck had been sunk was announced on the 1 p.m. news, spontaneous cheering and clapping broke out from those at lunch. As the efforts to hunt down and sink Bismarck involved not just Hood 6, but also the intelligence resources of Hood 3 and Hood 4, news of the role played by the code breakers swiftly made its way around Bletchley Park, raising morale and giving everyone a tangible feeling of making a real contribution to the war effort. The efforts of Bletchley Park in the sinking of the Bismarck would, thereafter, become a standard part of the initial briefing given to any new recruit. The news that Bismarck had been sunk was met with relief by the British population. Conversely, in Germany, the news created a general mood of despondency. In the Atlantic, in the immediate aftermath of Bismarck's sinking, desperate calls for salvation from the hundreds of German sailors floating amongst oil and debris in the strength-sapping cold water rang out across the seascape. Aboard Dorsetshire, Captain Martin issued orders for the cruiser to stop by the largest group of survivors and to begin rescue efforts despite the threat posed by U-boats and the likelihood of Luftwaffe attack. The sea was too rough for the crew of Dorsetshire to lower boats, while many men in the water were incapable of hurling themselves up rope ladders lowered over the side of the ship. Leading seaman Bert Gollop, who was in charge of one side party, instructed the men of his party to throw lifelines to the men in the water and to lower scrambling nets over the side, but many of the German sailors were too numb with cold to grab hold of them. Dorsetshire sailors leaned over the guardrails and urged their counterparts from Bismarck to try harder and implored them not to gather around some ropes while ignoring others strung down from other areas of the ship. It was impossible to haul up a group of sailors, while individuals were a different matter. Those in the water had life jackets and life belts, which gave them buoyancy. This was both a blessing and a curse, for, in some cases, the buoyancy of the men meant that they were easily swept away by the swell. A few, who were later described as dripping, shivering men, many of them little more than cadets, managed to make it up the side of Dorsetshire. For the men of the side party, the difficult part was the fact that Dorsetshire had a waistline of 30 feet. It was over this distance that many men had to be hauled up. Ropes came from nowhere. Willing hands rushed to haul inboard the survivors. Various groups began to haul with all of their might. One of those in the water was Joseph Stats. Making his way through the seascape, Stats came upon a cluster of men swimming towards Dorsetshire. He swam over to one of the lines on the leeward side of the ship and tried unsuccessfully to hold on to a rope, losing his grip each time. Finally, he made eye contact with a member of one of the side parties on deck. A rope ladder was lowered down, onto which Stats hung on with all of his strength. Once on deck, he was covered with a blanket and then taken below, where he was provided with dry clothing. Also in the water was Mullenheim-Rechberg. Mullenheim-Rechberg grabbed hold of a rope line and called up, "Please pull me aboard." At this point, the two men manning the rope began to haul it up. Having made it onto Dorsetshire, the first thing that Mullenheim-Rechberg did was to look down over the side at the men still in the water. As he looked, he estimated that there were around 800 men in the water, yellow life jackets pockmarking the sea everywhere. Mullenheim-Rechberg was not allowed to remain on the deck for long. A young telegraphist was issued instructions to take the captain-lieutenant below to the midshipmen's quarters where, like Stats before him as well as others, he was given dry clothing. Dorsetshire was joined in the rescue efforts by HMS Maori. Machine and Obergefreiter Hans Springborn was pulled under by the suction forces when Bismarck had slipped beneath the waves. Beneath the surface, he had been violently whirled around before regaining the surface. Having broken the surface, he swam away from the position of Bismarck sinking as fast as he could. Exhausted, he stopped swimming and began to drift. He drifted over to HMS Maori, where several times he tried to hold on to a line before finally being hoisted to safety by two seamen. Machine and Obergefreiter Bruno Zonker swam in the water for approximately an hour in an effort to keep active so that he would not succumb to hypothermia. During this time, he drifted towards Dorsetshire and was finally pulled aboard. Within 5 minutes of being pulled aboard, Zonker heard an alarm ring out. The alarm was in response to a sighting by Dorsetshire's navigating officer, Lieutenant Commander Brian Durant, who sighted a smoky discharge on the water off the starboard bow, approximately 2 miles distant. Durant pointed the sighting out to Captain Martin and to the others on the bridge. No one knew what it was, but the most likely explanation was a U-boat. Following the sinking of the 3 armoured cruisers, Hoog, Aboukir, and Cressy, by a single U-boat off Holland during the early days of the First World War, the commanding officers of British warships had been instructed not to stop and pick up survivors, friend or foe, if there was any risk of a U-boat attack. The Admiralty had already sent a warning that U-boats were being ordered to the area to provide assistance to Bismarck. If the discharge did indicate the presence of a U-boat, then Dorsetshire, lying stopped in the water as she was a sitting target. In the given circumstances, Martin was left with no option but to ring down from the bridge for full power. A signal was flashed to HMS Maori, whereupon Commander Harold Armstrong, the commanding officer of the destroyer, also called for full power. The water around the stern of Dorsetshire began to bubble and froth as the screws began to rotate. Slowly, the ship got under way, picking up speed with every passing second. As Dorsetshire got under way, men who were almost aboard were bundled over the guardrails. As Dorsetshire got under way, those in the water began to call out in despair, their faces etched with agony as their only means of rescue began to sail away. It was not just for the men in the water that Dorsetshire getting under way was a horrifying prospect. Mullenheim-Rechberg was in the process of changing into dry clothes when he felt the ship begin to vibrate violently.
What was happening? Was she leaving the area, and at full power? Now, in the midst of the rescue? Was there some sudden danger? From what? There weren't any U-boats around, as we knew all too well. Only that morning, we had asked for one to pick up the war diary and none had appeared. That was a sure sign that there were no U-boats in the vicinity. Also, neither during the night nor at dawn had any boat came to the aid of Bismarck. No rumor even of any intended U-boat action had reached me in the after station. It couldn't be a U-boat that had caused this precipitate withdrawal. What could have? German planes? If that was it, the aircraft alarm would have been sounded. I racked my brain, but the only thing that registered was horror that our men in the water, hundreds of them, before whose eyes Dorsetshire was moving away, were being sentenced to death just when safety seemed within reach. My God, what a narrow escape I had!
Out of the ship's complement of 2,221 who were embarked at the beginning of the operation, it is estimated that between 700 and 800 escaped Bismarck and made it into the water. Of these, only 110 were pulled from the water by Dorsetshire and Maori. Dorsetshire rescued 85 members of Bismarck's crew, one of whom, Maschinengefreiter Gerhard Luttisch, died of his wounds the following day. HMS Maori picked up 25. In the water, the Bismarck survivors who watched Dorsetshire and Maori depart began to believe that the stories that they had heard about the British not caring much about survivors were true after all. As they floated in the cold grey Atlantic, gradually they began to succumb to the cold and one by one lost consciousness and died. At 4 p.m, U-74 surfaced and began to search for survivors. Between 7:30 p.m. and 8:20, U-74 came upon a rubber dinghy in which there were 3 men. The men in the dinghy were Georg Herzog, Herbert Manthe, and Otto Honsisch. The 3 men had taken shelter behind Turret Dora and had pushed the dinghy overboard, which they jumped into the water after. The rescue of the 3 men was time-consuming and dangerous in the heavy swell. Pulled aboard, they were taken below into the bowels of the U-boat, where they were briefly interrogated. Only 2 more men would be rescued, taking the number of survivors to 115. At around noon on the 28th of May, U-74 crossed paths with the weather ship Sachsenwald, which had been ordered to the area to pick up survivors. Both U-74 and the Sachsenwald continued to search the debris-laden sea during the remainder of the day. During the evening of the 28th of May, Lieutenant Schutte aboard the Sachsenwald sighted 3 red flares and ordered the weather ship towards them. Around 10:30 p.m., Saxonwald came upon a dinghy with 2 occupants. "Are you German?" Schutt shouted. He was met with a cry of relief. "Yes, hurrah!" A Jacob's ladder was lowered to the 2 men, who climbed aboard. The 2 men were Matrosengefreiter Otto Maus and Matrosengefreiter Walter Lorenzen. Maus and Lorenzen would be the last survivors rescued from the Bismarck. Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more updates, like and share. You can also help to support the channel at Patreon. Details are in the description box below. If you enjoyed this content, why not also check out my Substack page for more unique historical insights and articles. A link to the page is in the description box below.